Over the last few weeks, governments worldwide have had to make difficult and sometimes conflicting decisions in response to the COVID-19 health crisis. Global populations have followed suit thus far, but at what cost? HEC Paris Professor of Marketing Anne-Sophie Chaxel talks about the consequences of this pandemic on judgment and, in particular, the potential biases to look out for when making decisions.
I think there are really two aspects to this question. First, how may the current situation impact how governments make decisions? And second, how the population may react to it. Regarding the first aspect of the question, I will cite three potential biases to watch out for, which seem to me to be particularly relevant to the current crisis. The first one is overconfidence. We have seen overconfidence operating at the beginning of the crisis, when we were confident the virus would not be a major disruption, and that even if it were, we would actually be ready to confront it. Overconfidence comes from a lack of meta-knowledge about the situation. Meta-knowledge is a fair assessment of what we know and as well what we do not know about something. In the case of the coronavirus, realizing that our meta-knowledge was extremely limited about the virus at the beginning of the crisis may have led us to take much more drastic decisions much earlier. Another bias that may be at play is actually a family of biases that we call confirmatory biases. Confirmatory biases happen when we select information that fits what we want to believe in, or when we process information in a way that confirms what we want to be true. For instance, at the beginning of a crisis, only selecting information that would tend to prove that the virus would not come to Europe, like warmer weather, or recalling example of viruses that were active in Asia but not in Europe in the past, would be a good example of that. But again, it's not only about selecting confirmatory information, it is as well about interpreting objective information in a way that fits what we want to believe in. For instance, looking at information about how to fight the virus, like drinking water, and then interpreting the results in a way that confirms what we would hope for, like drinking water actually helps fight the virus. And so this is actually one of the major reasons for the spread of fake news. And then finally, a last bias I want to mention is groupthink. It is a bias by which groups tend to avoid conflict and usually want to reach very consensual decisions, sometimes leading them to make more biased decisions than a single individual. Most governments have appointed groups of medical experts to gather and interpret information about the virus. But this is in no way a guarantee for avoiding biased decision-making, as experts have actually shown to be themselves subject to groupthink. If the expertise is well present in such group, this is really good. It's clearly a required first step for accurate decision making, but it is also important to make sure that the groupthink does not happen in those groups. There are ways to avoid consensus to be reached too fast, such as appointing a devil's advocate who would systematically take a different point of view and defend a different set of factions, and therefore challenge the consensus to make sure of the validity of the course of action that is chosen. So on the second dimension of the question, how the population may react to it, how does the situation change, how people make decisions? Well, this is actually a very difficult thing to predict because the current situation brings up very different emotions in different people, such as anxiety for some, anger for others, depression, denial. That being said, some of my work has demonstrated that having a limited time perspective or thinking of time as a scarce resource in our life actually increase confirmatory biases, the family of biases that I was just talking about before. So thinking about one's own mortality is definitely a good instance of framing the time that we have in our life as limited. So to a large extent, I would expect during the crisis to see people defend their belief much more than usual and show more confirmatory bias when they select and process information. So such increase in biases and in confirmatory biases in particular can only lead to more polarization in society during this time of lockdown, and therefore more stereotyping or more defensive judgments in general. I want to be hopeful though. As soon as the crisis is over, we might actually see the opposite happen. when people can go out, when they realize that they do have time in their life to do what is important to them, to reach the milestones that they want to reach, and when the time is not thought as a scarce resource anymore, potentially as an abundant resource, then we might actually see a sharp decrease in biases. At least that's what I want to hope for, and I'd expect people to be much more understanding of each other.